Welcome to Be More Speedboat, Less Supertanker. Why how you organise is critical to innovating successfully in large, complex organisations. Each and every one of us can go further and faster than we ever thought possible if we focus not only on what we're doing, but how and why we're doing it. Innovating in large organisations is hard. There are days when it's difficult not to feel like a very small cog in a giant wheel, when it feels impossible to get anything done without coming up against endless meetings or rounds of discussion that can slow down or even kill any sense of momentum and excitement you feel your project had. You look at those fresh-faced startup businesses with envy. They're not held back by process and red tape. They have energy and focus and speed. Large doesn't always have to mean slow, though. Let me give you an example. At 6:31 a.m. on Tuesday, the 8th of December 2020, this woman, 90-year-old Margaret Keenan, became the first person in the world to receive a COVID-19 vaccine. As landmark moments go in vaccine development, it is pretty unprecedented because in order for it to happen when it did, the time it usually takes to develop a new vaccine from scratch had to be slashed from 10 years to just 8 months, and without skipping a single step in the testing and approval process. Just think for a moment about how extraordinary that is, achieving in 8 months what ordinarily takes 10, even 15 years, but with the same level of rigour around research, testing phases, and regulatory approval. What made the difference was not necessarily changing what they had to do to get there, but how and why they did it, and why you can do it too. My name is Beth Pope. I'm a founder and managing partner of Firehouse. We're a brand consultancy that works with organisations looking to innovate and scale. And before Firehouse, I spent 20 years working almost entirely with large multinational clients in the retail, FMCG and automotive industries. Now, I get to work not just with startups and scale-ups in the early years of their growth journey, but with much larger, very long established organisations like the NHS or the universities of Bristol and Loughborough. And it's given me an insight into how organisations of any size innovate. I'm increasingly convinced that the key to doing that successfully in a large organisation means thinking and behaving more like a smaller one, by becoming a little less supertanker and a little more speedboat. Today, I want to inspire you to think about how you can go about doing that and why it's closer in reach than you might think. Remarkable as it may seem, the barrier to creating a COVID-19 vaccine wasn't the science itself. To a large degree, and I'm not a scientist, but as I understand it, the science was already there. There are literally hundreds of coronaviruses, some clearly more serious than others, from the common cold through to the likes of SARS. And scientists have been studying them for over 50 years. So there was already existing data on the structure, the genome and life cycle of this type of virus. And as a result, scientists already knew they had to target the coronavirus spike protein to develop an effective vaccine. They also knew that the vaccine platform technology that had been in development for the past 2 decades offered the possibility of being able to develop that vaccine much more quickly. So as I say, the science was at least already in part there. What dictates the conventional pace of vaccine development are what we might think of as human factors, not necessarily scientific ones. And I would argue this is true of any innovation endeavour. Research and development is always a gamble. De-risking that gamble takes money and time without being certain of having a viable product at the end, or indeed a market fit or demand for it. Proceeding with caution is safer, but it does impose its limitations. It takes time to make the case of funding. It takes weeks or even months to recruit enough people to participate in testing. It can take years to run the necessary clinical trials, one after the other, each making the case for the next phase of research or incremental product refinement. It takes months for all the data to be in place so you can then submit the paperwork for regulatory review and approval before you can even start production. Or does it? What the story of the COVID-19 vaccine teaches us is that the assumptions about how organisational processes play out are often just that, assumptions, and how it can inspire all of us to challenge our own. The real barriers to innovation are the perceptions that we and others have of the risk at each stage, the competing interests and capacity of the stakeholders who are critical to the progress we're making, and our innate preference as human beings for accepting things the way they are. As I say, these are human factors, not scientific ones. And as humans, we therefore each have the power to understand, challenge, and overcome them. In the case of COVID vaccination innovation, each step in the process was systematically overcome by thinking differently about how each would be achieved, essentially by organising and behaving differently. It required worldwide cooperation between universities, health systems, and the pharmaceutical industry, organisations that you might think are conventionally in competition or have, at the very least, divergent interests. But by April, there were more than 100 candidate vaccines geared up for development. Within weeks, trials were taking place simultaneously in different countries. Mass participation in vaccine trials was enabled through digital technology and social media, and a rapid expansion in physical testing sites. Regulatory fast-tracking was possible because data was collected and released during the development process, rather than, as typically happened before, in a single submission at the end. So behaving as a relay, not as a single sprint. And because red tape was swept away to prioritise reviews and approval. And then commercial production was accelerated by an advanced commitment to purchase vaccines by multiple sources, including governments and private companies who between them shared the risk. But this thinking and behaving differently could not have happened on its own without something else pretty fundamental, by there being a shared motivation and ambition across many, many different stakeholders, one that reached across diverse needs and interests. In other words, by a huge why. Lives depended on it. And so, if we're honest, did livelihoods and legacies. It's a powerful combination if you want to drive through innovation at speed. Now, granted, few of us have the context of a global pandemic to press us into different ways of delivering progress on innovation. We don't have the eyes of the world or billions from government coffers to speed us on our way. I don't think that matters. This kind of problem solving, this what if mindset, is one I see time and time again on a smaller stage with the startups and scale-ups Firehouse works with. It comes naturally to them at their stage of development, possibly because if you're a startup, what's at stake to some extent is essentially survival. But I have seen it work successfully with teams in much larger organisations too. And I want to give you a real live example of where I'm seeing this working with one of the universities we work with, the University of Bristol. Now, universities are powerhouses of creativity and innovation. All those brilliant minds, all that research, enough to make the R&D division of any global corporation weep. Finding ways to turn that thinking into commercial real-world impact through partnerships and collaboration is a really important way to build a university's reputation and bring in revenue. And the University of Bristol does it better than many. For instance, it recently topped a list of UK universities when it came to generating the highest returns from investing in spin-outs. Spin-outs are businesses that started off the back of university research. But there are still a number of barriers to accelerating and scaling that innovation. Universities are huge organisations. Their structure is actually incredibly siloed. There are many, many stakeholders, all with different needs and different interests. And they're actually very internally focused, whatever they might say to the contrary. Accomplishing anything at speed and scale is actually extraordinarily difficult. They're just not set up to do that. You don't have to work in a university yourself to potentially recognise some of those characteristics in your own organisation. So how do you unleash that potential in full? And how do you rapidly communicate that to potential partners or collaborators or investors on the outside, the de facto customers who are critical to success? Well, one of the first decisions made was that these relatively disparate facets of innovation within the university should be brought together with a focus under a unified identity, and one that sat separately to, though of course still in harmony with, the main University of Bristol brand. They may share the same values, the same ethos and vision, but innovation's role in delivering that needed to signal a different way of thinking and doing things, a different route to the university's overall direction and destination. A distinct brand is one way of doing that, signalling a specific mission and liberating those involved from the existing way of doing things. We then needed to define that purpose and what challenge the university's innovation expertise was there to solve. The breakthrough point here was to stop actually seeing it as one single challenge, but as a collection of separate challenges, each requiring its own path through, which when combined could have a huge impact. What public bodies and funders are looking for is different to what industry partners need, which is different again to investors and academics or entrepreneurs. As soon as you realise you are dealing with a whole series of distinct challenges, the possibility that each might require a different solution also rears its head. What's critical here is that the end goal remains the same. We want to be able to support innovators inside and outside the university to turn their ideas into impact. But as soon as you change your mindset to see this as not one big challenge, but a series of smaller ones, you open up the possibility of reaching that destination in a series of different ways, through a sequence of more marginal gains, which have the potential to add up to one big one. And that means agility and creativity come to the fore. Unlike a supertanker, ploughing in a straight line towards a destination with a heavy cargo to shift in one go, you are able to behave maybe more like a sailboat, tacking across the water, side to side, catching small gusts of wind and consequently picking up momentum and speed as you go. The route, if I'm honest, has not always been plain sailing, but one of the consequences of adopting this different way of thinking and working is accepting that mistakes are inevitable, but knowing that you're set up to learn and course correct quickly and often. This is something startups and scale-ups innately understand and practice. Curiosity, open-mindedness, and iteration are key. For example, contrary to the way most big companies behave, we went ahead and actually developed a provisional logo and visual identity at the outset of the project. The proposition was then developed through a series of rapid-fire workshops with key stakeholders. The results were imperfect, but good enough to be able to put a stake in the ground, allowing us to signal intent and meaning behind what we're doing, and then enabling us to treat the development of the services that sat underneath that as prototypes rather than as finished products. And that's the way that startups and scale-ups work all the time. It's quick, and if you're not used to it, it can feel a little bit chaotic, but we've been able to make progress much more quickly, and it's been easier to get stakeholder approval along the way. The direction is broadly right, if precisely wrong, but at this stage of the process, that's the best way for it to be. In order for us to achieve that, how we worked became absolutely critical. Over the course of just a couple of days, actually, we managed to achieve what would ordinarily have taken weeks or even months. We ran a series of rapid-fire, one-hour workshops to really quickly consult with senior stakeholders to understand more about the motivations of the key audiences they were focused on engaging. The timeframe meant it wasn't possible for people to bring their own agenda quite so much into the room. And they were brought into the broad overall direction in advance to be willing to take a chance on an iterative process that would give them the clarity that had been missing from previous conversations. Put on the spot, people have to make choices about key needs, priorities, and solutions. In other words, over the course of those workshops, we were essentially tacking from side to side through each issue in turn. And now that we've narrowed down those areas of focus, we've regrouped as a much smaller team. meeting for shorter periods of time, much more frequently, to then work through the detail of each audience group in turn and gain a richer understanding that then means we can develop the services and products spinning out of the initial foundation we've built. Each person in that small team has a distinct role and perspective on the challenge. They've earned their place at the table. And importantly, we're essentially mapping out a process and model that we can then replicate across other audiences to create impact quicker and at scale. By breaking the challenge down, we're actually able to move with greater clarity, agility, and creativity. And it means we'll be able to tailor communications and advice in a much more compelling way to each audience, tacking, if you like, from one gust of wind to the next towards our end destination. All of this is very, very different from how the university, any university in fact, typically thinks and behaves. Challenging the assumptions behind how and why something is ordinarily done can have a transformative impact on clarity, on motivation and momentum. So, what do these stories from two very different areas tell us? And how can you apply them practically to your own endeavours? Well, I want to share with you 4 ways you can empower your organisation and yourselves to become a little more speedboat than supertanker, by focusing not so much on what your innovation is, but how and why you're doing it. First up, if you're feeling fired up to find a different way of innovating, you need to think about assembling your trusty crew of companions who are going to be on that journey with you. At Firehouse, we do this at the start of every project. There isn't room on the speedboat for everyone, so you must gather together 5 to 7 people who best represent the best characteristics of your organisation, its vision and its values and what you're looking to achieve. That's easy, subconscious even, if you're a founding team in a startup. But if you're a big organisation, you need to choose really carefully who is best placed to help you spot and navigate the known and the unforeseen obstacles that you will inevitably encounter, and moreover that you will need to encounter to be successful. Who can make key decisions with you and act on them without delay? Who can bring diverse perspectives and skills to the problem that you're trying to solve? Whoever you select, your team should include a natural leader and also a mentor who can hold influence with senior people. My second piece of advice: don't even think about setting out from that harbour without first being clear about your end destination and why you want to get there. Not just with your crew, but with any stakeholders who have an interest in you reaching it. Defining an ambition at the outset, a vision for what you want to achieve, and then aligning that purpose with others is one of the most important things we've learned to do on the projects we've worked on. It helps to prevent people bringing their own agenda to the table. And it allows you to stay on course even if your understanding of the problem or the nature of the solution changes, as it almost certainly will do. Thirdly, once you have internal alignment and clarity, it's absolutely crucial to take a look at the challenge or challenges from the outside in. And this is particularly true in large organisations, which are so often, aren't they, echo chambers of opinion. And it's hard to see the true nature of a problem and the right way to solve it unless you see it through several other people's eyes, just as it's hard to see the label from inside a jar. And that's not just about your customers or end users, but other stakeholders, buyers and partners. And as I've said, the real problem is often not the one you start out thinking you're trying to solve. Stay curious and be open-minded to what others need and are looking for. Finally, be prepared to iterate, to tack. When it comes to problem solving and innovation, it's always better to do something imperfectly, learn from it and improve than overinvest up front. That's often helped by breaking one big problem down into a series of smaller ones. Just because you're a large organisation doesn't mean the problem you're trying to solve needs to be. Reach for the next branch, the next milestone, move with the next gust of wind, then focus on the one after that and the one after that. Innovating is an iterative process in large organisations as much as in small ones. Above all, it requires agility, flexibility, and creativity. How and why are powerful human tools for change, and ones we all have at our disposal because they exist up here in our minds. Each and every one of us can go faster and further than we ever thought possible if we focus not only on what we're doing, but critically how and why we're doing it. Thank you.